Hi, this is Mario Andretti, and this is Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, welcome back to your Sunday night with Speed City. I want to welcome to the show. I've become a fanboy of this gentleman because I started reading his coverage a couple, 3 years ago, and then really closely during the Andretti thing and the Andretti Cadillac developments. And Nathan Brown has really caught my attention. He writes for the IndyStar newspaper and the USA Today and has really done a great job. Nathan, welcome to Speed City.
Thank you guys for having me on this evening.
Well, we appreciate it. And you broke this story, Nathan. Correct me if I'm wrong. In my mind, you did, because on December 7th, you did an article about the new Andretti headquarters and that you had gotten to speak with several people including Michael Andretti, at this event. And you started talking about all things that I had never heard of, including Guggenheim and the big bomb was that you got Michael to say, we're hoping in the next couple of weeks, and it would be a nice Christmas present to have word about their Formula One efforts. Did I get that right? Did you break all that?
Yeah, that was correct. It was a great chance to talk to Michael. I hadn't gotten a chance to talk to him about their Formula One project in quite some time, and that was a great opportunity at their groundbreaking ceremony in Fishers to get a good update. His Christmas present, at least publicly, didn't come to fruition, but it was not more than a couple weeks before we got word that he and General Motors, specifically Cadillac, were pushing forward to try and submit an official entry to the expressions of interest process that the FIA is planning to open here soon. As I wrote there, as you mentioned there, they've got some great funding partners to build this $200 million facility that should be up and running here by early 2025. And as Mario Andretti said at that ceremony, they expect it to be one of the best motor racing facilities in the entire world. So excited to see what that looks like, and excited to see not only what types of racing teams they host there, but what kind of cars they might be building, including potentially for this Formula One project that they have up in the air right now.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan, did Michael say anything about NASCAR at that opportunity you had to talk with him? Because I've seen quotes from him since that eventually NASCAR Cup racing is on his to-do list as well.
So it's funny. So at the time, I didn't think a whole lot of it. I talked to Michael a year ago, right when they were on the cusp of that Sauber deal that ended up falling through at the 11th hour. And he had talked, at that time, just kind of about the process of building his race team. And we all know that, he'd been close a couple times on a NASCAR project. And he'd said at that point, that was just kind of generally always on their radar, but nothing super specific. But at that groundbreaking ceremony in early December, there was a Fishers city councilman that had a slip of the tongue and actually said that they were already in NASCAR. And I can't remember
a politician getting his facts mixed up.
Exactly.
Happens.
It was I think it was Michael that caught it first and said, well, we're not there yet, but Mario said, well, we could be there too. So, it's certainly something that they're interested in. And I know the quotes that you're referring to that Forbes initially ran this week that said that that's something that they are keenly looking at, and certainly wouldn't be surprised if, in a couple of years, along with their hopeful Formula One entry, if that was not a place that they were able to find a way to sneak into one way or the other.
Yeah. I have to confess, when I read the article and I saw they were going to build at the Indianapolis airport, I assumed that meant Indianapolis International. And all my Indianapolis friends laughed at me when I said that, because they said Fishers is northeast of the city, and it's the Indianapolis Metropolitan Airport. Now, is that airport capable enough, if that's the right phrase, to be a factor in what the Andretti global operation does in terms of flying product in and out?
I don't think that airport is super important to that effect. Really, I think what it comes down to is that airport, whoever owns and operates it has had a lot of land that over the last couple of years they've been hoping to be able to sell off, to continue to revitalize and grow the city of Fishers, and open up that specific area of the city to some commercial development, some things in the city that could generate people flocking to it, whether it's restaurants or small shopping malls. And this Andretti project, with the fact that they're going to have this Italian restaurant and this museum and this amphitheater, it's going to be right on this multi-use walking, biking, running trail that they have there in Fishers. So it's going to be right in this hub of this up and coming area in this city, that I think will be really cool, because often you see, for folks that have been in Indianapolis, if you're driving around and kind of wondering where a lot of these race team shops that are located here, they're oftentimes in these business parks that aren't really super obvious. They're not in these great places where you can, notice them very easily. And the way I envision this Andretti global facility here in a couple of years, I think it can be a really great center of activity for the Fishers community, which will be really cool to see, especially if, of course, they have a Formula One team that is primarily operating out of there.
Sounds like a good place for a test track right outside the back door.
Possibly. I'm sure they've got plenty of space for it.
Yeah, we've seen that kind of thing in Austin, Nathan. We've seen, my son took me to this place, and he's going, this is like one of the premier carbon fiber shops in town. And I pull up and like, this building? It's like this, it's a completely nondescript, and you go in and go, wow, it blows you away. But hey, I want to read a couple of those quotes we were just talking about from Michael Andretti, because the first one's where he talks about money. These were the ones that he said to Forbes earlier this week. I think it was like Monday or Tuesday. He says, it's all about money. He says, first, they're going to get diluted 1/10 of their prize money, but then they also get very greedy, thinking we'll take all the American sponsors as well. And that's, of course, Michael Andretti talking about all the other F1 teams. He said, it's all about greed and looking at themselves and not looking at what is best for the overall growth of the series. And, this has been Michael's MO from I guess February. I guess this all started when Mario tweeted on February 15th or something last year that this was all going to happen. But then the other quote that he said was, he says, we've been working, and he was talking about the announcement and how they chose to do the announcement when they did. And he said, we've been working on this announcement for a while, Cadillac, GM. He says, but when the president of the FIA, Mohammed bin Salim, issued his tweet supporting our effort, that is when we decided to make the announcement. Once they make an expression of interest, then we are in competition with other teams. And that expression of interest, of course, is the official process. He says, we're on our way, because that means we will do an extra team. So it's been interesting to watch that. And as soon as I saw that tweet from Mohammed bin Salim, I think it was like on the Monday or Tuesday of that week, I immediately thought, okay. And then, 48 hours later that Andretti announced it. But Andrew, Nathan, I want to ask you some other things here. I wrote down some of the things that Andretti has done in the last year since Mario's tweet last year, and I put down the IPO funding, which hasn't been talked about recently, and maybe you can shed some light. Maybe that has something to do with Guggenheim or others, but they did the IPO funding. They broke ground on the new $200 million headquarters. They've started hiring staff. The news that they've partnered with Guggenheim, and they've partnered with GM and Cadillac. So they came out, and then they basically got, shunned by F1 and saying, really shunned by saying there's no news really at all, except that they're looking at it. So did I get that right? And did I miss any other major things that have happened?
I mean, I would say the only other really big thing, and we continue to hear it referenced, even, 8-9 months later on, that Michael was present at the Miami Grand Prix to the level of walking around the paddock with a sheet of paper that he was, although it was an informal petition that had no, legal weight by any stretch of the imagination, was trying to garner the signatures of the team principals of the 10 current Formula One teams in the paddock, just essentially to symbolize that they supported his push to join the series in the near future. He famously, only publicly on that document, only got the signatures of Zach Brown from McLaren and Laurent Rossi from Alpine, which are the two teams that you would expect. It's no secret that at least at some point, we're not sure right now where things stand, but at one point when Michael was planning to come in on his own, that they would have an engine deal with Renault Alpine's team. And of course, Michael and Zach go way back and are partners with the Australian supercars team, Michael Andretti. So there's I guess that was the biggest thing. We've heard some vague references from some reporters over in Europe about how folks, either the team principals or officials in the Formula One management group with Liberty Media, that haven't been super happy with the way that Michael has gone about trying to garner support for this project. And I think that was a really big lightning rod moment where he's being very public, was going out literally in the open. I was the first person that was able to kind of see and spot him in the paddock in Miami, and frankly just walked up to him and and asked what he was doing. He showed us the document, and it was an interesting way to go about things. Very public, very open, very honest. Something that drew a good amount of media attention. And frankly, I think there are still some folks in that paddock that were just rubbed the wrong way about trying to use the public from a pressure standpoint or from a media standpoint to try and continue to push to try to get this across the finish line. And for whatever reason, there's a lot of folks over there that haven't been super happy that was the way he went about things.
Yeah, that's so American. We don't knock on doors, we kick them in. And I've had a lot of experience with that over the years in international motorsports. But there were a couple of other things that were mentioned in some of the many articles that you mentioned, Nathan, being written. One was that a lot of the teams think a $200 million dilution fund, if you want to call it, is nothing compared to what it costs compared with other major sports around the world. I mean, you try to get into Premier League soccer, or just here in the United States domestically, NBA, NHL, NFL, Major League Baseball, it shouldn't be a $200 million entrance fee. It should be a $600 million entrance fee, because those are the kinds of numbers they deal with. And I was particularly struck, and we'll hear from Toto Wolff later on, about how Andretti has, if I'm hearing him right, has done exactly the right thing. We needed to know what kind of impact they were going to have on the sport. They've got GM and Cadillac. That's a statement. That's the kind of thing we're looking for. I think they were worried that Cadillac was going to put a $20 million name on someone else's engine and get the benefits of Formula One. But apparently Toto and hopefully others have been educated to the fact that Cadillac really is in this with both hands and both feet. Is that the impression you get?
I mean, that was the impression that I got from the initial press conference that we had just a little over a week ago. Though they didn't have maybe a ton of specific details, they were open and honest and said, when we come in, whenever we are given entry to the sport, we will, we already have a signed agreement with another engine manufacturer that we will use to kick off our program. But as the years go by, I'm obviously summarizing here, they said that they have plans to ramp up, and it was also not as if they were planning to just use this as a marketing ploy. They referenced a couple different technological centers here in the US, one in Michigan, one in North Carolina, that they planned to both help Andretti build cars out of, and also, I believe, assist whatever engine manufacturer that they had signed on with to produce that technology and get it to the level that it needs to be in Formula One. So I certainly never felt like this was GM just coming in to write whatever check it would cost to slap a sticker on and call this engine their own. But that was, from some of the articles that came out a couple, over that weekend and into Monday of last week, from some reporters that were talking to folks inside the current Formula One paddock, that was definitely the sentiment that they got. At least I didn't come across that way. I don't know why. That was just the general assumption. We don't have the specifics of Andretti's project, and I would assume that they maybe don't necessarily either. There's expressions of interest process hasn't opened up, so I'm sure whenever that does, Michael and General Motors and their team will, I'm sure, have a very specific plan to present to the FIA and Formula One management team about exactly how they plan to go about this. But that was never something that was made public. So I really do feel like that was a lot of assumptions from folks and some rumors that really kind of took off, when I don't know that there are a whole lot of people out there that really truly know exactly the 5 or say maybe even 10-year plan of what Andretti Global and General Motors are hoping to do with this if they were to gain entry in a couple of years.
It's interesting because you talked about the power units. As soon as this came out, I thought, okay, they signed the deal with Renault. They said they'd done a deal. But then I looked up the relationships with Renault and GM. And then I saw that last year that Renault and Nissan, who had that long-time relationship, and GM kind of broke up. They had a divorce of sorts. And then I noticed that Honda and GM had just signed a big new agreement to do with electric vehicles. And, Cadillac has had a lot of traction, no pun intended, with the new electric Lyric. And, and even this flagship Cadillac, and they're all going to be electric. And you think about what's about to happen in Formula One with the new power units having more and more electric power. So I think that makes sense for GM to spend a lot more money in engineering in Formula One. I think it's going to be, if I'm remembering correctly, it's like 60% electric power now in Formula One starting in 26. But because of that Honda relationship that they just signed, I thought, okay, this looks like Honda, but we have no idea. Obviously, nobody knows for sure. But I really thought that was really interesting. But well, Nathan, we're almost done with this segment. But if you've got any other thoughts before we let you go, I know you said you could stay with us for a segment. So anything else you can think of on this story?
Let me think here. I mean, I think this is certainly something that's not going to go away. I think we're going to continue to see ebbs and flows of this storyline. Certainly whenever Michael and his team at Andretti Global get the green light to actually submit their program to this expressions of interest process that the FIA, I think, says will take a couple months. That'll be, I certainly think that the FIA will do their due diligence. Certainly seems like the president is generally in support of what Michael is doing, but this will be a time where everyone at the FIA will get a full idea of what they have in store. And then it's really going to come down to how Michael can try to get the decision makers at the Formula One management group, what we think of as Formula One specifically, how he can get them on their side. As we've seen through some of their statements and quotes on the record that Stefano Domenicali and some others have given, they've pushed back at the idea that they even need another team whenever Michael has been solely on the forefront. And then as he's continued to gain momentum, as some other teams and operations are in the background, kind of rumored to be looking at Formula One in a couple years, there's now been the idea that, they're pushing this idea that Andretti is not the only one looking at this. So I think it's going to be incredibly important that Michael can get some of those big wigs, those decision makers at Formula One on his side. It's not necessarily team principals, but it's really those folks that run the commercial arm of Formula One. And if that doesn't happen, I don't know that this goes through. So I think hopefully we will see him take a little bit of a different approach, and maybe once a lot more of these facts about exactly how he plans to run this come to the surface, at least privately behind the scenes, in those presentations he gives those folks, those will be the key moments that we will see whether or not we see this team push through to the finish line in a couple of years.
Well, speaking
Is
of
this going to be
those-
your beat going forward, Nathan?
What was that?
Is this going to be your beat going forward, the Andretti saga?
It certainly will continue to be every moment that this we kind of see twists and turns in the road. This will be something I will be paying a lot of attention to as I continue to put a lot of my time and effort into IndyCar. That's my main beat, but anything that Andretti has to do anywhere in this motorsports world, particularly in Formula One, because it's so big here, it's just a no-brainer of something that we'll be paying a lot of attention to at IndyStar, and we'll continue to have news and thoughts, analysis, and hopefully be answering some questions for folks about how this process is going to continue to go.
Well, Nathan, thank you so much. And if you're watching and listening, you follow Nathan because he has some fantastic information. Like I said, he broke the story, and Nathan, I don't think I've done a show since last year, February, that we haven't mentioned Andretti Formula One. So we follow this very closely, and we will keep an eye. I'm going to set your Twitter on notifications so it pops up on my phone every time you tweet. Thank you,
Where
Nathan.
can people follow you, Nathan?
Yeah. How do they?
What's your handle? Where can people?
Yeah, on Twitter, but @by_ Nathan Brown is my Twitter handle. And you can read all of my content at IndyStar.com. We will continue. I'll actually plan to have another update on this Andretti story, at least one, if not more, later this week. So if that's a story that you're keenly interested in, please continue to check back there and follow my Twitter account, and we will continue to monitor this story as it develops.
Awesome. Nathan, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a